What a funny guy. He always had that.
There are lots of performers who have a close relationship with their audience. I mean, the Grateful Dead comes to mind. I mean, Fish comes to mind. But there is something, you know, notably, even uniquely communitarian about Springsteen's relationship with his audience. I mean, this is something that has been a part of his, you know, again, persona, a term I use to suggest both myth and reality. I mean, you know, the sort of the sound checks where he goes to the back of the room, you know, before the show, making sure that everyone can hear well. You know, the way that he keeps the block of tickets and up front, you know, until the very last minute. The way in which the sort of the mythic inviting the girl on the stage with him. These are all sort of gestures. You can't necessarily read too much into that. It's all for show, literally. And yet the habit of doing this kind of thing over a long period of time suggests more than just you know, a kind of packaging on his part, but really, especially when you combine it with, you know, the topics of his songs and the generosity of his shows, you know, the stories of them going on and so on. It's really part of a larger picture of a democratic rock star, an almost contradiction in terms that Springsteen manages to sort of square, you know, and make legitimate in some sense.
Halfway through the production of his next album, Born to Run, Springsteen invited producer-cum-journalist Jon Landau to listen to the results. To Mike Appel's disapproval, Landau took over production of the album, and a lasting partnership was formed.
I think Landau was a sounding board. I think he was an intellectual, but I think he was an intellectual with roots in rock and roll. And I think he really literally opened Springsteen's mind to all manner of things, musically, politically, sociologically, all sorts of things. And of course he's been there for, you know, over 30 years as, you know, producer, manager, and, you know, sort of a very loyal friend. So I think he has played a very important role. And I think at the beginning, I mean, he was absolutely crucial in shaping, maybe not so much the sound, but just almost giving Springsteen an identity.
The album that resulted from this fruitful union, Born to Run, was to bring Springsteen international acclaim. With its superior productions and anthemic tracks, the record became a benchmark of 1970s rock music.
Born to Run is a much better record than the first two albums. And I believe it's a better album than the two that followed it as well.
The thing about Springsteen and Born to Run was it just arrived and it was just like wham, and it was just in your face, and you thought, yeah, I mean, here's a guy who's listened to Phil Spector, who's listened to Roy Orbison, who's listened to Bob Dylan. He's soaked all that up, he's putting that in this record, and you could hear that in Born to Run. I mean, you know, people now, perhaps it's a bit sort of dated and, you know, sexist and chauvinistic, and the whole album's a bit sort of creaky. But at the time, you know, it just had this real impact. It came shooting out, and you just thought, yeah, this is really good. The production, the lyrics, the singing, there was real intensity to it, and that was missing from music. I mean, there wasn't that passion. Springsteen really rekindled the passion in rock and roll in the mid-70s. And, you know, I think it's to his eternal credit. I mean, it wasn't fashionable, but he just wanted to get some of that excitement back that he had as a kid, and it really wasn't anywhere else. And I'm not saying single-handedly, but I mean, he just came back and he really gave it a kick up the bum, and you know, I think to his eternal credit, he just got it moving again. And I think Born to Run was the album that did it.
Not only did Born to Run display an evolution in Springsteen's music, the lyrics escaped the autobiographical New Jersey setting by which they had previously been identified and trod new creative ground.
I think on Springsteen's early records, I don't think there's much question that there are some really very obvious autobiographical elements. I mean, you know, something like a song like Spirit in the Night, you know, can't but have, you know, real people sort of attached to it. I think that as you get, you know, into Born to Run and Darkness on the Edge of Town, Springsteen is very consciously, you know, realizing that it's a big world out there, and that he wants to sort of, you know, portray a wider canvas. I mean, you even see it in the settings of some of these songs. I mean, these are far away from anything he's ever experienced. I think that's part of the story here.
In particular, Springsteen, like many American lyricists before him, became drawn to the metaphor of the road.
Well, you know, this is an old trope in American culture. It goes back at least as far as, you know, Walt Whitman, who talked about sort of Song of the Open Road, and Mark Twain, you know, was a restless soul and covered the West and the South and whatnot. And so this is a venerable tradition even before Woody Guthrie gets to it. And then, of course, Dylan picks up where Guthrie left off. I think what's interesting about Springsteen in this regard is that Springsteen's embrace of the road had a more of an embrace of America at large. I mean, I think people like Dylan somehow held it at arm's length. There was a kind of skepticism somehow about mainstream American culture that impelled these people on the road. Springsteen, you know, wanted to sort of blaze his own path, literally and figuratively, but I don't think he felt the same degree of alienation from America. And for him, the road was a sort of an encounter of discovery about learning what else he was a part of, more than it was getting away. That I think it is for, you know, for the Beats, for example. There's a kind of sense of inclusion, of belonging to Springsteen's love of the road that I think makes him a little bit different than some of these other folks we could talk about.
Born to Run was the album that CBS and his fans had been waiting for. In October, Springsteen made the covers of both Time and Newsweek, and he was roundly recognised as a distinctive performer with an original and genuine artistic persona. By the end of the year, he had toured Europe and Canada. Yet a rapidly growing fan base and mainstream recognition was soon to be tainted by internal conflicts. In 1976 was a bleak year for both Springsteen and his fans. In February, for the first time since signing with Appel and Kratikos, Springsteen asked to see his accounts. He was shocked by what he discovered therein, and in July he sued Mike Appel for mismanagement.
When Bruce signed up with them guys, I sat down to him and I said, Bruce, you have the perfect right to have your own accountant and to audit where that money goes. It would be worth your while, I'm only suggesting, to get an accountant, to everything they spend, the duplicates go to you, and audit the books. Keep an eye on your money. Obviously, you know, Bruce was into playing his music. He didn't give a damn about that.
The lawsuit dragged on throughout the year. In 1977, settlements were made, and Springsteen began working on his next album. Yet, as that record showed, the year-long legal battles had left their mark on the artist.
There's something almost hard to believe, well, actually all too easy to believe, something almost out of a bad movie to think of, you know, go back earlier, that Springsteen would sign a contract on the hood of a car in the dark parking lot, you know, in the early 1970s. I mean, that sort of credulousness that he had, that he brought to the relationship with Appel, you know, I mean, it just goes to show, you know, how much of Springsteen's investment in his work led him to sort of foreclose or even, you know, shut off other sides of things. I think this was an important event for him, mostly indirectly. You know, we were talking earlier about the, you know, the role of autobiography. I don't think the closest Springsteen ever came to sort of talking about this in his work was a song called "The Promise," which he didn't release for a very long time. I don't even know if it's been released at all. And I think that he backed away from that because it seemed too autobiographical, and I think actually he probably had the good sense to recognize that there were people in the world who had much more serious problems than struggling with his manager over the terms of a contract. Although I think that this was a real scare for him, but I think that this experience informed, you know, Darkness on the Edge of Town in particular, and sort of made him experience in a visceral way that things might not really turn out the way you want them to. I mean, he had seen people like his father where things hadn't turned out well. Suddenly he was confronted with the possibility that this could really happen to him. And I think that really was very, very important in terms of shaping what happened from there on out.
When the new album finally appeared in 1978, it became obvious that Springsteen had changed. Darkness on the Edge of Town, as its title suggests, was a far more somber outing than Born to Run.
Well, you know, I think that Born to Run is a record about anxiety, and Darkness